In this video, we're going to show how to use both StatCrunch and Minitab to do a hypothesis test for a population proportion. Now, to illustrate this, let's use an example from the Sullivan text. So in February 2008, the Gallup organization surveyed 1,034 adults between 30 and 64 years of age and found that 548 were worried that they would outlive their money after they retire. Does the sample evidence suggest that a majority of 30 to 64-year-olds in the United States are worried they'll outlive their money? Use the alpha equals 0.05 level of significance. Now notice that what we're trying to determine is if a majority of 30 to 64-year-olds are worried they'll outlive their money. That means we want to know if the true proportion is greater than 0.5. And so that implies that our hypotheses are going to be HO, P equals 0.5 versus H1, P is greater than 0.5. And so this is going to be a right-tailed test. Now, there are three assumptions for this test. First, that the sample is obtained by simple random sampling. Second, we need to check that N times P sub 0 times 1 minus P sub 0 is greater than or equal to 10. And finally, we need the sampled values to be independent of each other. Now let's assume that we've already checked these assumptions, and so we're ready to run the test in StatCrunch or Minitab. First, I'm going to run the test through StatCrunch. So now we're in StatCrunch, and I want to do a one-sample test for a population proportion. So I'm going to go to Stat, Proportions, one sample with summary, because we don't actually have the raw data, we just have the summarized results. So now I need to identify the number of successes and the number of observations. Well, we had 548 people in our sample say that they were worried they'd outlive their money, and the sample size was 1,034 adults aged 30 to 64. So I'm going to click Next. We're doing a hypothesis test, and now we need to identify the hypothesized value for the population proportion P up in the null hypothesis. Well, in our test that's going to be 0.5, and you see that StatCrunch enters 0.5 as the default value, so we don't need to change that. However, we need to change the alternative from the default is not equal. We need to change it to greater than, because remember, this is a right-tailed test. Now click Calculate. And we've got our results. Now the first thing to do is to double check that you've set this up correctly. StatCrunch says that we've got a null hypothesis of P equals 0.5 versus the alternative P is greater than 0.5. That's exactly what we wanted. Notice that StatCrunch reports back the values that we entered. We had 548 successes out of 1,034 trials. That gives us a sample proportion of P hat that rounds to 0.53. Our test statistic is about 1.93. And the corresponding p-value is 0.0269. Now let's see how to run this test in Minitab. Okay, so I'm now in Minitab, and remember we want to run a one sample test on a population proportion. So I'm going to go to Stat, Basic Statistics, One Proportion. Now remember that in this problem we don't actually have the raw data, we have the summarized results. So I'm going to select Summarize Data. We had 548 adults say that they were worried about outliving their money. The number of trials, or the sample size, was 1,034. We want to perform a hypothesis test, and our hypothesized proportion from up in the null hypothesis is 0.50. Let's check under Options. You note that by default the alternative hypothesis is not equal, but we have a right tail test, so we want to change this to be greater than. And finally, we're using the test based on the normal distribution. So select that option. Click OK. Click OK. And we've got our results. Now again, double check that you've set this up correctly. Minitab tells us that we're testing p equals 0.5 versus p is greater than 0.5. That's exactly what we want. Again, it reports our sample results that we entered. We had 548 successes out of 1,034 trials. That gives us a p hat of about 0.53. Our test statistic z sub 0 is 1.93, and that gives us a corresponding p-value of 0.027. And you notice that's rounded up from what StatCrunch gave us. StatCrunch gave us 0.0269.